Okay, welcome back. This is going to be the Pickett episode. I finally am going to look at some Pickett slide rules. I don't have too many Pickett slide rules in videos, but I recently made a video on the N4, which I'm going to bring up again in this video. So let's kind of take a tour through the late Pickett slide rule catalog. Most of the slide rules I have, you see here, are full-size 10-inch slide rules. Mostly the Pickett metal slide rules. I have one or two plastic ones. I think I have one here to show you. But I'll point out the kind of one that I'm missing. But what I have here are kind of the Pickett's late model. This is the 60s, let's say, general purpose slide rule catalog. Okay, let's start with this first one. This is a N902ES. The N is added for kind of, I think it means new, for Pickett's later slide rules, sometimes when a slide rule is updated. I'm not sure if they put all the N on starting in some year, but earlier versions you'll see just marked 902. So here's an N902. It has kind of a late style Pickett logo there, late style cursor. Pickett starts out in the 40s making magnesium slide rules, but very early on switches to aluminum slide rules. So you can see very classic Pickett construction is plastic cursor, aluminum slide rule. This one is Simplex. It just has instructions on the back, actually. This is kind of the simple end of Pickett's range. There is a 901, I think, which is made at the same time, which doesn't have trigonometry. So the 902 is called the Simplex trig slide rule. It has almost a Reitz scale layout in some sense. It has trig on the slide, which I like, kind of squeezed in there. The earlier 902 Simplex trig does not have the CI scale, so you can't do combined operations quite as easily. So I like the fact that they added the CI scale, although kind of the earlier one, it just looks so balanced and nice that I'm a little bit divided on that. CI, though, does make it a little bit more easy to use, let's say. Okay, this is a nice slide rule. This is built on Pickett's 1-inch frame. So you can see they make frames which are 1 inch, and these three are 1.5 inch width out of aluminum. The N3 and N4 are made on a 2-inch frame, so you'll see all three frame sizes here. I think the ones which are larger than 1 inch, or at least which are not this 902, include springs here, which put a little tension on the slider, keep it from sliding out and make it easier to adjust. I like the 902. I wish they had put the two-color printing on it. By two-color printing I mean red scales. Two-color printing is added kind of later in Pickett's life, but at the time this 902 was made, they were putting the dual-color printing on the other slide rules, and they're just not putting it on this as a cost-cutting measure. This is a cheap slide rule, low end of the range. I'd wish they had done that because it would make it even a little nicer. Just kind of a nice, simple, great trainer slide rule. And in fact, this is an older Pickett plastic slide rule called the Model 120 Trainer. Later, I think this was replaced by the Microline 120 plastic slide rule. It has the same scale set as the 902. So a very nice slide rule to learn on. This is the early plastic construction Pickett slide rule. There you have it. Okay, well, let's focus on the metal ones. Now, there is a slide rule between this 902 and this one, which is the 800, called the 1010, or 10 something, depending on when you're getting it, which is kind of it's a duplex. I think it's built on a 1-inch frame. I don't have one, but it's a duplex slide rule built on this frame. You see they just put scales on the back, which includes folded scales, additional trigonometric scales, and depending on the era, one or two other scales. But it's basically a non-log-log duplex small slide rule. If you don't need the log-log scales, you might look into the 1010. Okay, stepping up in complexity here, I have the Model 800. This one you can see it just says Model 800, not N800, but later ones you'll see Model N800. Actually, this is an anachronistic cursor on this one. This slide rule is kind of salvaged from several slide rules. So this is not the cursor that it came with. But stepping up in complexity here, you have the Model 800, which is a basic log-log slide rule. It kind of competes with the K&E 4081, basically a log-log slide rule with 6 log-log scales. So typical of Pickett is what's called the Synchro Scale. So the Synchro Scale is the log-log scale back-to-back with the corresponding log-log scale for bases between 0 and 1. So on these scales you can read reciprocals directly. Pickett's one of the only slide rule manufacturers that really, I think, arranges log-log scales like that. If you're used to it the other way, it's a little confusing. You know, you go off LL1 here, you got to pick it up down, well, on the other side. But then if you go off here, you got to pick it up down here. I think, actually, since I don't really use the reciprocal feature very often, I think that having it in the standard layout is more, it's just more natural to use, because when you're going to fall off the scale you're going to go onto is adjacent to the scale you're coming from. Just a little bit more natural. But it does make Pickett stand out from other manufacturers. Okay, what does this slide rule have over the 4081? They've got additional scale on the slide, 5 scales on the slide, where K&E puts 4. So that makes it a little bit more like the Dietzen scale set. You can see my video on the Dietzen scale set, and actually the 800 is almost exactly the Dietzen scale set, except that they've taken out T2 on this side and they've replaced that with a C scale. So the Dietzen slide rule and the K&E do not have C here. The Dietzen does have a T2 scale there. So I think this is a nice, balanced, all-purpose log-log layout. One of my favorite Pickett slide rule designs, the Model 800. Now, this is a later Model 800. Here I do have an earlier one. So this earlier one shows you some of Pickett's kind of earlier slide rule construction. So let's have a look. So it is aluminum. The aluminum is thicker on the earlier construction slide rules. So this is kind of the thin construction. This is the earlier thick construction. The outside of the rail is grooved on the earlier construction, and this is metal. Okay, so it does have a nice heft to it, the earlier construction Pickett slide rules. A really nice heft. But what you can see, though, is that the scale set on the earlier Model 800 is identical to the later Model 800. So the 800 is a long-lived scale set in the Pickett universe, basically unchanged, because I think it's a good general-purpose log-log scale set. Let's give you a look at this earlier Pickett slide rule. Okay, only has one color printing. Pickett, of course, doesn't engrave their scales. They put their scales on through a photographic process, which is how they're able to cram so many scales into a small space. So compared to a similar size rule from another manufacturer that engraves their scales, you're going to find more scales on the Pickett. Okay, now, you don't like the back-to-back scales. You think that they're kind of visually hard to read. You can, instead of the 800, get the Model 500, which when it's later is called the high log log. This has exactly the same scale set as the Model 800, except that the back-to-back scales have been removed. So this scale here is split into these two, and the same thing on the other side. It hasn't rearranged the log-log scales, so the only change is that they've been un-back-to-backed. They haven't been rearranged. So if you don't like the back-to-back visually, then you get the Model 500 high log-log. Now, as a word of warning, the Model 500 begins life as a different slide rule. The original Model 500 is a slide rule with traditional log-log scales, not the keyed to C and D log-log scales that the Model 800 has. And this kind of differentiates the two models. So later, I think it's when the N500 comes out, Pickett switches this to basically just be a copy of the 800 without the back-to-back scales. So the earlier Model 500 is a different slide rule in scale set. It has the log-log scales between 0 and 1 keyed to A and B. I have a video on that, that also, if you're interested in how to use those. But if you want a late model Pickett without the kind of back-to-back scales, you can get the Model 500. Everything I said about the scale set is still true. This cursor on this one is an older cursor. I think this one originally came with this style cursor. Okay. Now, you want to step up in complexity from the 800, you can go to the 803. The 803 is appearing later in the Pickett era. It's interesting, I'm not really sure the reason the printing on this 803, the dark color, does not look as nice as on this Model 500. I'm not sure if that's a printing error or what. But the Model 803, in the later catalogs they say the Model 800 is a simplified 803, but actually the 803 came out later as a more complex version of the 800. The Model 803 I think really is a competitor to the Versalog and Decilon slide rules. It adds an additional log scale, LL0, for additional range on the low ends. The Versalog and the Decilon slide rules have those scales. It also adds the square root scales, which the Versalog and Decilon both have. It has both A and B. One or both of those scales are missing from the Versalog, depending on which one you have, but they exist on the Decilon. So the only difference in scale set between the 803 and the Decilon is this DFM scale. The DFM scale is what makes this dual base slide rule. Pickett calls it a dual base slide rule because when you set something on the log scale, you can read the base 10 log on the DFM scale. So DFM is a folded scale, folded by the conversion factor you need to convert those logarithms. Okay, so I tend to think this slide rule is getting a little bit unbalanced in the sense that it only has 3 trigonometric scales. So I would have liked to see a T2 scale somehow on this, but you can see they're really pushing the limit of the 1.5 inch frame. I tend to like the Model 800 because it's really not pushing the limit. It's got a nice number of scales for the frame size, but the 803 is really pushing it. You can see the difference that late in production Pickett makes these Eye Saver yellow colors, those are marked -ES, and these white slide rules, those are marked -T. Okay. Now I have a separate video on the N4, but stepping up you can go to the N3 or the N4. The N4, you should watch my video on it, kind of is a descendant of Pickett's earliest slide rules from the 40s. It contains hyperbolic scales. The N3 does not contain the hyperbolic scales, is kind of more of a superset of the 803. It has standard log scales. So depending on your preference, if you need the hyperbolic scales, you might go with the N3 over the N4. But you can see now we have the large 2-inch frame on the N4. Okay, let's see. Is there anything else to say here? Here I have one additional treat slide rule for you. This is an N600. Pickett has a lot of slide rules. They have a lot of specialty slide rules in addition to the ones that I've shown you here. They have the late plastic slide rules, the micro line, and then they also have pocket slide rules. I only have this one. This is a Model N600. This is a tiny slide rule. Let's see my hands here. But it has, I think, the same scale set as the 800. Let's have a look here. Yeah, it looks like the 800 scale set on the N600. This slide rule is famous for being taken on the Apollo missions. Of course, not the slide rule that I have, but this model. Probably a good slide rule because of how small and light it is. Let me just, for comparison, put this N600 against Faber-Castell slide rule I just did a video on, the 283. So let's put a 2. Here's the Faber-Castell 280. Both of these are 5-inch slide rules with 5-inch main scale lengths. Look how much bigger the Faber-Castell slide rule is than the Pickett. Something like a 4181 is in between these two, or a Hemi pocket slide rule somewhere in between these two. But this really shows you how Pickett squeezes things into their slide rules. Which you might like and you might not like, depending on your preference. Okay, this has been a quick tour of Pickett slide rules. Hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great day.